Let me tell you a story that happened somewhere near Willow Creek, Montana, a land of vast skies and seemingly endless pastures. The sun beat down brightly there, but life was always good, especially for one man, Mr. Alistair Finch. Alistair Finch wasn't just a farmer, he was the farmer. Owning lands that stretched as far as the eye could see, he had what was called the best cattle in the region. His Hereford and Angus cattle were prize-winning, worth their weight in gold. And Alistair was very proud of it. He was a large man, his face reddened by the sun and his hands like tree bark, accustomed to giving orders and getting things his way. If there was a problem, he solved it with money. If there was an illness, he dealt with it by hiring the best veterinarian in the state. But look, sometimes fate likes to play tricks that all the money in the world can't fix. It all began on a Tuesday morning, one of those really cold ones when the frost was still clinging to the fences. The foreman, a quiet fellow named Silas, came running, his face as white as milk. He never ran. "Mr. Finch! Mr. Finch!" Silas shouted, banging on the door of the main house. Alistair, who was drinking his coffee in the huge kitchen, grumbled. He didn't like being disturbed before 6. "What's wrong, Silas? Did a calf come out crooked?" Silas could barely breathe. He pointed to the main corral, where the breeding bull, the famous Duke, the pride of the farm and valued at a fortune, lay. "The Duke, sir. He won't get up." Alistair dropped the porcelain cup and ran. He knew his animals. Duke was a mountain of muscle and vitality. Seeing him there, slumped on his side, breathing with difficulty, was already a very bad sign. He poked the bull with his boot. Duke didn't even react. His eyes were glazed over, and there was a strange, thin foam in his mouth. "Call Dr. Peterson. Now," ordered Alistair, his voice already thick with anxiety. Dr. Peterson, the most expensive and respected veterinarian in Willow Creek, arrived in less than an hour. He examined Duke, took blood samples, listened to his heart, but seemed increasingly confused. "He doesn't have a fever, Alistair. It doesn't seem to be colic. His vital signs are strange. It's like he's shutting down from the inside," said Peterson, scratching his grey beard. They tried serum, they tried stimulants, but it was useless. At noon, Duke breathed his last. Alistair Finch felt a tightness in his chest that wasn't just because of the lost money. It was a feeling that something was wrong, something he couldn't control. What you've heard so far is just the beginning of what really happened to Alistair Finch. The healer's intervention not only changed his herd, but altered the fate of the entire farm. Before we delve deeper into this story, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to bring you more intense and exciting narratives like this one. He ordered Duke buried far away, the entire corral disinfected, and the rest of the cattle isolated. He hoped it was an isolated case, perhaps a weed the bull had eaten. But Tuesday turned into Wednesday, and the plague, if we can call it that, showed its ugly face. On Wednesday morning, 3 young heifers, which were in the furthest pasture, were found dead. They were not swollen, they had no injuries, and it seemed as if they had died in their sleep. The same glazed look, the same lack of explanation. On Thursday, there were 7. By this time, panic had already gripped Finch Farm. Alistair was a man of logic and science. He didn't believe in superstitions. He believed in investment and modern medicine. He called the state. He brought in specialists from the capital, people who wore latex gloves even to handle grass. There were 5 veterinarians in white coats, each with equipment more sophisticated than the next. They set up a makeshift laboratory in the barn. They spent days analyzing the soil, the water, the feed, the air. They collected samples from the cattle that were still alive, measured their temperature, and injected preventative vaccines for everything they could imagine. Rabies, botulism, foot and mouth disease. The diagnosis: 0. "Mr. Finch," said the younger doctor, a woman named Sarah who looked exhausted and frightened. "We haven't found anything. The bacterial cultures are clean. There's no known virus that causes this rapid cellular deterioration without other symptoms. It's as if the life is being sucked out of them." Alistair, who had already lost 20 head of cattle, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His empire was crumbling, not because of a fire or a financial crisis, but because of an invisible, silent, and relentless enemy. He spent a fortune on disinfectants, new fences, and imported feed, thinking the problem lay in something he had neglected. But every time he woke up, Silas would bring the same news. 1 or 2 more dead. The worst part was the way they died. They would become lethargic for a few hours, stop eating and then simply collapse. It was a sadness that spread across the pastures. The silence on the farm was deafening. Where before there had been the cheerful sound of hooves and loud mooing, now there was only the cold wind. Willow Creek was a small town, and news travels faster than airplanes. Soon, the neighbors began to notice. Alistair was burning carcasses every day, and the dark smoke could be seen for miles. The other farmers were terrified. They isolated their own herds, fearing that the finch plague would cross the fences. Fear generated whispers, and whispers generated stories. No one wanted to buy meat from Alistair anymore. No one even wanted to visit the property. Finch Farm, once a source of pride, had become a place of ill omen. Time passed, and what had been a crisis turned into an unprecedented disaster. In 3 weeks, Alistair had lost almost 100 head of cattle. That was a quarter of his main herd. The veterinarians, heads bowed, packed their bags. Dr. Sarah squeezed Alistair's hand sadly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Finch. There's nothing more science can do here. We suggest you cull the rest of the herd to avoid further losses and let the land rest for a year to take down the rest." It was the same as telling Alistair to give up everything he had built. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand, his body trembling with contained rage. He was alone in the office, surrounded by insurance papers and incomplete medical reports. The smell of disinfectant and death seemed to have seeped into the walls of the house. That night, Alistair couldn't sleep. He put on his thick coat and went out into the darkness. He needed to see what was left. He found Silas sitting on a bale of hay, staring into space. Silas was a man of few words, but with much wisdom of the countryside. Alistair sat down next to him. "Silas, what do you think this is?" Alistair asked, his voice hoarse, lacking his usual authoritative tone. It was the voice of a man pleading for an answer. Silas picked up a handful of dry hay and let it fall slowly. "It's not an animal disease, Mr. Finch. If it were, Peterson would have found it. Doctor, Peterson knows all about animal diseases." "So what is it? Is it the soil? The water?" Silas shook his head, gazing at the cold stars of Montana. "It's the earth, sir. But it's not the soil. It's something beneath the soil, something that was agreed upon." Alistair snorted. He hated this kind of vague conversation. "Don't give me any ghost nonsense, Silas. I need a real solution." "You asked for my opinion, Mr. Finch, and I think you're trying to solve a problem of the spirit with money. It doesn't work that way." There was a long silence, broken only by the whistling wind. "What would you do, Silas, if this farm were yours?" Silas hesitated. He looked around, as if afraid of being heard by the very air. "Do you remember Ilara's story?" Alistair rolled his eyes. "The healer? The crazy old woman who lives by the riverbank? The one who sells herbal teas and talks to the crows?" "She's not crazy, sir. She knows things that city people have forgotten. The Indians and the ancients always went to her when science failed. She doesn't use medicine. She uses what the land provides." Alistair Finch was a businessman, an agricultural magnate. Turning to a faith healer seemed the ultimate humiliation, the final stage of madness. He thought it was something for simple, uneducated people. "I'm not going to call that woman, Silas. She'll want to do some ridiculous dance with feathers and charge me an outrageous amount." "She doesn't charge money, sir. She charges what the land demands, and she's the only one who can see what's killing her cattle. It's not a plague, sir. It's a curse." The word curse echoed in the cold air. Alistair felt a chill that didn't come from the temperature. He was desperate. He had lost over $200,000 in cattle alone, not counting veterinary costs. His name, his reputation, everything was at stake. He looked at Silas, who kept his eyes fixed on the darkness. "Have you been with her? With this Ilara?" "No, but my grandfather did. When the drought of 35 almost destroyed everything, he said it made it rain in 3 days. Alistair pondered. He had tried everything money could buy. What if Silas was right? What if this problem defied logic and reason? He thought of the cattle, those noble creatures that died for no reason. He thought of his farm, which was turning into a cemetery. He swallowed his pride, which was bigger than the bull duke. "Where does she live, Silas? Tell me exactly where this woman lives." Silas smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, like someone who knew that defeating arrogance was the first step towards the solution. "She lives in the old cabin near Urso Waterfall. It's a difficult trail, sir. You'll have to go on foot, and when you go, don't take money, take respect." Alistair nodded. The decision was made. He, the powerful Alistair Finch, would seek help from an old healer who spoke with crows. He had nothing left to lose but the farm itself. The journey to Ilara wouldn't be easy, and Alistair knew that if anyone in Willow Creek found out, he would be the laughingstock of the town. But he was willing to pay the price if it meant saving what remained of his flock. The truth was, he was more frightened than ever. What would he find in that cabin? And what exactly was the land asking for? The night was long, and Alistair Finch prepared for the walk, unaware that he was about to discover that the mystery of his cattle's deaths was far older and deeper than any disease men could name. The problem wasn't in the animal's blood, but in the forgotten history of that land. And Ilara, the healer, was the only one who remembered. He needed to see her before another animal fell dead with that empty stare. The sun would rise in a few hours, and with it the promise of more losses. Alistair couldn't wait. He had to go now. He had to find Ilara. Alistair Finch left the barn, feeling the weight of his decision like an iron yoke on his shoulders. The early morning air was biting, and the darkness seemed to engulf the farm's boundaries. He didn't want Silas to see him leaving. The humiliation was too great. The richest farmer in Willow Creek, who always solved everything with a phone call or a check, was sneaking out in the middle of the night to look for an old woman who talked to crows. He put on his warmest coat, grabbed a flashlight, and began walking eastward, where the Willow River meandered and the forest closed in. The path to Bear Falls was notoriously treacherous. There was no road, only an old trail, perhaps used by hunters and the few who dared venture deep into the forest. Alistair was an office man and a driver of luxury vans. His body, though large and strong, was not accustomed to leaping over fallen logs and balancing on slippery rocks. With each step, he felt the protest of his knees and the friction of his lungs against the icy air. As he walked, the anger he felt toward the veterinarians began to transform into a cold acceptance. They had spoken the truth. Science had no answer. And if science, with all its microscopes and blood samples, had failed, perhaps the answer lay in something older than man himself. He stumbled on an exposed root and cursed under his breath, his flashlight swaying and revealing the dense, silent forest. The silence was unusual. On his farm, even at night, there was the distant sound of some animal, a soft moo. Here, there was only the wind cutting through the trees. He thought of Dr. Sarah, the young veterinarian, saying that life seemed to be being sucked out of the animals. That image tormented him. It wasn't a disease attacking. It was an absence, a void. The trail began to climb abruptly. Alistair stopped to catch his breath, resting his hands on his knees. He looked back, but the light from the farm had already disappeared. He was completely immersed in the wilderness, a place he had always seen as something to be dominated, cut down, and turned into pasture. Now he was at its mercy. After nearly 2 hours of grueling hiking, he began to hear the sound. First a distant murmur, then a steady, powerful roar. Bear Waterfall. The sound of the falling water was a relief, a sign that he was getting closer. The trail opened into a small rocky clearing where the mist from the waterfall hung in the air. And there it was, Ilara's cabin. It wasn't a building, but it seemed to have sprung from the earth itself. The walls were made of old logs and moss. The roof was covered in living grass and ivy. There was no electricity, but a warm orange light escaped from a small window, and the scent of wood smoke and medicinal herbs filled the air. What caught Alistair's attention, however, was not the cabin. It was the silence surrounding it. Not the empty silence of the forest, but an attentive silence. There were crows, lots of them. They were perched in the nearest trees, watching Alistair with dark, intelligent eyes. They made no sound, but their gaze was heavy, as if they had been waiting for him. Alistair felt a primal fear, the same fear he had felt when he saw Duke dying. He approached the door. There was no doorbell. He hesitated, raising his hand, which looked like it was made for counting money, and knocked 3 times on the rough wood. The door opened almost immediately. Ilara was not what Alistair had expected. He had imagined a hunched-over old woman, perhaps dressed in tattered clothes and strange adornments. Instead, the woman who stared at him was small but upright. Her hair was long and snow-white, braided with small wooden beads. Her eyes, however, were what held his attention. They were a deep, penetrating blue, and seemed to see through his thick jacket, his empty wallet, and all his pride. She wore simple grey woolen clothes and held a small ceramic pot. She did not smile. "Farmer Finch," Ilara said, her voice low and dry like autumn leaves being trampled. It wasn't the voice of a madwoman, but of someone who had seen many seasons. "I was expecting it." Alistair felt his face grow hot. How did she know? He tried to regain his authoritative posture, but exhaustion and humiliation prevented him. I'm Alistair Finch. I need your help." Ilara stepped aside, inviting him inside. "I know why you came. You lost the bull, Duke, and the rest of your herd is being taken one by one. You tried poison, science, money, and the money failed." Alistair entered the cabin. The interior was surprisingly tidy. A fireplace was lit, filling the place with warmth and light. Bundles of dried herbs, roots, and flowers hung from the rafters. There was a strong yet pleasant scent of sage and damp earth. She pointed to a small wooden stool near the fire. "Sit down. You smell of despair and disinfectant." Alistair sat down, feeling like an awkward giant in the small space. He took off his hat, exposing his sweaty brow. "Silas sent it to me. He said the problem isn't the disease. He said it's the land." Ilara nodded, sitting down in a low chair where she seemed to fit perfectly. She picked up a kettle that was near the fire and poured a dark liquid into 2 earthenware mugs. "Silas is a man who can still hear. You, Alistair Finch, you only hear the bank bell." She handed him a mug. "Drink this. It's valerian root and chamomile tea. It will calm the fear that's eating you up inside." Alistair picked up the mug. The warmth was comforting. He took a sip. It was bitter and earthy, but somehow it calmed him. "I don't understand. If it's not an illness, what is it? I'm not a superstitious man." Ilara looked at him with those deep blue eyes, and Alistair felt like he was being judged for his entire life. "You don't have to be superstitious to be ignorant, Finch. The land isn't just soil and pasture. It's memory, it's history. You built your empire on the land, but you never asked the land what it wanted. You just took it." "I bought the land. I paid the price they asked," he defended, reverting to his usual businessman demeanor. Ilara laughed, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. "You bought the paper signed by the man. You didn't buy the soul of the land. And the soul is sick. And when the soul of the land is sick, it defends itself. It rejects what is new, what is imposed. Its animals are noble, but they are foreign to this place. So what's going on? Is it a curse, like Silas said? It's an imbalance, a cry for help. You dug, you stirred things up. You brought in chemicals to clean and sterilize, and with that you awakened something that should have remained asleep." Alistair frowned. He thought about the large drainage projects he had undertaken a few years ago to improve the pasture, and the construction of the new cold storage barn, which required deep excavations near the old dry creek. What did I wake up to? Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were listening to something very far away. "I can't tell you here. I need to go to your farm. I need to feel the place where it all began, where Duke fell. I need to see the wound you opened in the earth." Alistair felt immense relief. She agreed to go. "Sure, I'll have Silas get the truck ready. We're leaving right now." "No." Ilara opened his eyes, and their force made him recoil. "I don't travel in machines that tear through the air, and I won't go until the sun rises. Night is the time of confusion. The sun brings the truth." She got up and went to the fireplace, stirring the ashes with a thin branch. "And before I go, Alistair Finch, you need to understand the price. I don't accept money. My payment is balance. If I solve your problem, you'll have to give the land what it demands, and the land may ask for something you value more than all your cattle." Alistair thought of his empire, his reputation, his pride. He had already lost so much. I will do whatever it takes, I swear." "Men's promises are as fragile as spring ice," she murmured, "but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. You'll do one thing now." She pointed to the door. "You will return to your farm, alone, on foot as you came. And along the way you won't think about money, losses, or how you'll explain this to your neighbors. You will think about only one thing. What is the most precious thing you have that cannot be bought or sold?" Alistair was confused. "Why?" "Because if you don't know what's truly valuable to you, you won't know what the land can ask in return. What the land wants is a sacrifice of the heart. Go. I'll be at the main fence of Finch Farm when the sun is at its zenith. Don't try to rush me and don't try to pay me." Alistair stood up, feeling strangely lighter despite his fatigue. He had a mission, a direction. He had traded cold logic for blind faith, but it was his only chance. "I'll be there." He left the cabin, returning to the darkness of the forest. The crows were still in the trees, but now they seemed less menacing, more like silent guardians. The journey back was different. Alistair's body still ached, but his mind was occupied. The most precious thing you have which cannot be bought or sold. It was easy to think about his farm, of course, but the farm was made of land and money. He could lose it. His cars, his jewelry, his stocks, all of that was sellable. He thought of his wife, who had passed away years ago. Their love was precious, but she was gone. He thought of his health, but it was failing. What was left? He walked along the dark trail, the roar of the waterfall fading behind him, and began to realize that, for a man who had accumulated so much, he possessed very little that was truly irreplaceable. The sun began to paint the Montana horizon with pale shades of pink and orange. Alistair was almost out of the woods, panting, when the reply hit him with the force of a punch. "Your reputation." Alistair Finch was known for his infallibility, his ability to control the market, and for never making mistakes. His pride was his armor, and his reputation was his shield. He would rather lose 10 head of cattle than be seen as weak or foolish. The fact that he was dragging himself home after seeking help from a healer was a direct blow to his reputation. He was willing to pay that price, to be ridiculed, if it would save the cattle. My honor. My pride. That was the most precious thing he had, the thing he guarded more fiercely than any safe. When he finally emerged from the forest and saw the familiar fences of his farm, the sun was already high. He was dirty, exhausted, and covered in leaves, looking more like a beggar than a millionaire. Silas was standing near the barn looking out at the pasture. When he saw Alistair, he ran. "Mr. Finch, where have you been? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Silas. I went to see Alara." Silas didn't ask any more questions. He simply saw his boss's condition and knew the mission had been completed. "Is she coming?" "She will come at noon, at the main fence. And Silas, don't tell anyone that I called her. No one." "Yes, sir." Alistair went home, took a quick shower and put on clean clothes, trying to wash away the dirt of the forest and the smell of herbs. But inside, he felt different. He had broken his own mold. Time passed slowly, and the fear of further losses consumed him. He observed the pastures. The surviving cattle were huddled together, listless, awaiting their fate. At noon, Alistair, Silas, and some farmhands were gathered near the main fence, pretending to inspect the barbed wire. Alistair was nervous. He didn't know how his men would react to seeing the healer. Right on time she appeared. She didn't come by road, but by the river path, climbing the small hill. She was alone, walking with a quiet dignity, carrying only a wooden staff and a cloth bag. Alara stopped at the wire fence exactly as she had said. She didn't use the gate. She just waited, her hands crossed over the stick. Alistair walked towards her, swallowing his pride under the curious stares of his farmhands. "Alara, thank you for coming." "I came for the land, Finch, not for you." She gazed at the vast pasture, which was strangely silent. "Where did the first animal fall?" "The bull, Duke." "In the main corral near the new barn." Alara closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the farm air. The smell of death is strong here, and the smell of new metal. She opened her eyes and pointed to the fence. "I don't need gates." Alistair, understanding, pulled the pliers from his belt and cut the wire fence, opening a space for her to pass. Ilara crossed slowly, stepping on the land that Alistair considered his own. "Take me to the place." Alistair guided her past the enormous metal barns and agricultural machinery, which looked like useless toys in the healer's eyes. When they arrived at the corral, which had been completely sterilized with very expensive chemicals, Ilara stopped. The place was made of packed earth and cement. "It was here. We tried to clean everything up." Ilara ignored his words. She dropped the staff and knelt, placing her bare hands on the cold, dirty ground. She closed her eyes again. Alistair and Silas watched in tense silence. The pawns, who kept their distance, looked confused and somewhat mocking. Ilara remained like that for a long minute, motionless, as if listening to the earth whisper. When she finally stood up, there was an expression of deep sadness on her face. "The wound is deep, Finch, and it's infected with pain." "What did you feel? Is it the ground?" "It's the memory. Here, where you built your metal and cement barn, there was a sanctuary." Alistair snorted, trying to remain calm. "A sanctuary for what? Squirrels. It's just a piece of land." "It wasn't your piece of land, Finch. It was a resting place, a place where the ancients buried their sacred belongings so that the earth would protect them. A place where peace was kept." "Ancient? Are you talking about Native Americans?" "I'm talking about everything that came before you. When you dug to build the foundation of this barn, you didn't just remove the earth, you removed the protection. You broke the circle." Alistair remembered the engineer's account of the difficulty of the excavation, where they found many strange stones and ceramic remains that were thrown away as trash. "What does this have to do with my cattle?" "The cattle feel the earth more than you do. They drink from it, eat from it, lie on it. The earth is screaming, Finch. And your cattle, being the closest to the earth, are the first to hear the scream and feel the rejection. They are dying of sadness, of imbalance, not of viruses. Life is being sucked from them because the earth itself is rejecting the life you put into it." Alistair felt a chill down his spine. It wasn't an illness, it was a silent war. "How do I fix this? I can cover the hole. I can close the barn. It's more complicated than patching a hole. You need to restore what was taken away, and you need to pay the price." Ilara walked slowly toward the new and imposing structure of the cold storage barn, which was Alistair's pride and joy, a multi-million-dollar investment. "Where did you dig the deepest?" "Right there," said Alistair, pointing to the southwest corner of the building. "We had to dig 10 meters for the foundation." Ilara stopped, closed her eyes, and placed her hand on the cold metal wall. She began to murmur words in a language Alistair had never heard, a language that seemed ancient and full of hissing and guttural sounds. "Peace has been stolen here," she said, turning to Alistair. "You have to restore peace, and the only way to restore peace is through sacrifice." Alistair's heart raced. He thought of more cattle. He thought of money. "What do I need to sacrifice, Ilara?" "I'll give you everything that's left of the herd." Ilara shook her head. "It's not about cattle. It's about what you value more than cattle, and you already know what that is." Alistair swallowed hard. He remembered his reflection in the forest, his reputation, his pride. "I'm willing to pay. Tell me." "You need to undo the harm you've done, and the harm you've done is destruction and arrogance. This structure, this barn, is the symbol of your offense. It was built upon the deepest wound in the earth." Ilara pointed to the barn. "You need to tear down this barn, Finch, completely. And in its place, you're not going to build anything. You're going to plant, you're going to give this place back what it was, a place of silence and rest." Alistair Finch was in shock. The cold storage barn was the crown jewel of the Finch farm, new, modern, efficient. Destroying it would be a catastrophic financial loss, an act of madness that would confirm all the whispers of Willow Creek. "Tear it down? Ilara, do you know how much that cost? It's a multi-million-dollar investment. And how much did Duke cost? And the other heads? The price of your arrogance is far greater than the price of cement and steel. If you don't remove this scar, the land will continue to reject your life. You will lose the entire herd and then the farm." Alistair paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He could feel Silas's and the other farmhands' gazes on his back. They thought he was going crazy. Isn't there another way, some kind of ritual? Ritual is action, Finch. Ritual is humility. You need to show the earth that you've understood the mistake. Destroying your masterpiece is the sacrifice of your pride. Ilara looked at him intently. If you don't do this, I'll leave, and your cattle will die. Think carefully, Alistair. Are you willing to lose your money to save your farm, or are you willing to lose your reputation to save your life? Alistair stopped. He looked at the barn, a symbol of his success, and imagined it reduced to rubble. He looked at the pasture, where the cattle huddled together awaiting death. He thought about what Silas had said. She demands what the land asks for. The price was his pride. Right, said Alistair, his voice low, almost a whisper. I'll tear down the barn. Ilara expressed neither surprise nor triumph. She simply nodded. That's a good start, but there's more. You have to undo the damage you've done, and I need to know exactly what was taken from here when you dug. Do you remember finding anything? Alistair tried to rack his brains, thinking about the construction reports from years ago. We found ceramics, strange stones. The engineer said they were remains of some ancient tribe. We dumped everything on the landfill near the southern boundary. Ilara's face contorted in disgust. You threw the guardians in the trash. I didn't know. Now you know. The second step, before tearing down the barn, you're going to find every piece of those ceramics and stones. You're going to clean them and return them to this place. They need to rest. And then, the third step, which is the most difficult. Ilara turned towards the pasture where the animals were. You're going to have to apologize, Finch. Not to me, not to your men. You're going to apologize to the flock. You're going to confess your arrogance and ask forgiveness from the land. And you're going to do it alone. Alistair felt he was entering a world of madness, but Ilara's serenity was contagious. There was no turning back now. He had to trust the healer. When do I start? Now. Call your men. Start searching for the guardians at the landfill, and I'll prepare what's needed for the cleanup. But Alistair Finch, if your heart isn't in your penance, none of this will work. The earth knows when you lie. Alistair nodded to Silas, who watched the scene with wide eyes. Montana's wealthiest rancher was about to destroy his most prized possession and dig through the garbage, all to please an old woman and the earth. It was the lowest point in his life, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a small glimmer of hope. He was taking action, not just waiting for death. The mystery was beginning to unfold, and he knew the solution lay in the dust and humility. The battle against the invisible plague was far from over, but now he had an ally who understood the language of silence and the earth's pain. He had to start digging. The destruction of the barn would be the ultimate price, but the search for the relics was the first act of his penance. He had to find them. He had to prove that his pride was worth less than the lives of his cattle. Alistair Finch had to start digging. He had to prove that his pride was worth less than the lives of his cattle. He had to start digging. He called Silas and the two most trusted farmhands, Ben and Jerry. They were men of few questions, but Alistair could see the confusion in their eyes when he instructed them to grab shovels and thick gloves and follow him to the landfill, the southern boundary of the property, where all the construction debris and farm waste was dumped. "What are we looking for, Mr. Finch?" Ben asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Alistair avoided the men's gaze. "Remains of pottery and stones, things that were taken from the excavation of the barn a few years ago. We have to recover them." He didn't mention Ilara, who was sitting quietly near the corral, mixing herbs in a wooden bowl. The landfill was a smelly, disorganized pile of debris. The stench was suffocating, a mixture of rusty metal, burnt plastic, and decaying organic matter. For Alistair, a man who spent most of his time in air-conditioned offices, the stench was a physical assault. "Are you sure, Finch? This is a garbage dump." "There must be hundreds of tons of rubble here," said Jerry, covering his nose with his shirt sleeve. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Jerry. Start digging, and start with the oldest part. The things that were taken from the barn should be in the first layer of trash we dumped here." Alistair picked up a shovel. He, the man who operated multi-million-dollar excavators, was sifting through garbage with his bare hands. Sweat began to trickle down his face, mingling with the dirt. The humiliation was palpable, but the fear of losing the rest of the cattle was greater. They dug for almost an hour. They found old cans, pieces of barbed wire, broken concrete, tires, nothing that looked sacred or ancient. Alistair's frustration grew. What if Ilara was wrong? What if he was wasting valuable time? "Mr. Finch, look here," Silas called out. Silas was digging more methodically, respecting the earth, almost asking permission before plunging the shovel in. He was on his knees, carefully clearing a patch of dark soil. Alistair ran towards him. Silas was holding something small, about the size of a fist, covered in dry earth. He carefully cleaned it, revealing a stone. It was no ordinary stone. It was perfectly smooth, a dark grey hue with faintly shimmering veins of quartz. Its shape was strange, almost oval, and it seemed to have been polished by time or human hands. "It's different. It's not from around here," Silas murmured, examining it. Alistair felt a chill. It was exactly the kind of strange stone the engineer had mentioned, an artifact. "Keep looking, Silas. There have to be more." Encouraged by the discovery, the men returned to digging with even greater fervor. They began to find fragments, pieces of thick pottery painted with simple geometric patterns in shades of ochre. The pieces were cold to the touch, and even soiled with debris, they conveyed a sense of age and purpose. It took all morning. Alistair, his hands blistered, dirty and exhausted, supervised the collection. They found nearly 20 smooth, dark stones and a large quantity of pottery fragments, which, if put together, would form perhaps 10 small vessels. When the sun was at its zenith, Alistair carried the metal bucket full of the finds back to the corral. Ilara was there where he had left her. She looked at the contents of the bucket without touching them. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "The guardians have returned, but they are stained with your disrespect. What do I do now?" "You will clean them. With the purest water you have and with your own hands, you will restore their dignity. While you do that, I will prepare the place." Alistair took the bucket to the farm's washing area. He used the water from the artesian well, the cleanest water. He sat on a crate and began scrubbing the dirt from each piece of pottery and each smooth stone. The task was time-consuming and meticulous. As he cleaned, he reflected on the history of that land. He had always seen it as virgin territory, ready to be explored. Now he realized it was a history book, and he had torn out the most important pages. Cleaning the artifacts, he felt a strange connection, as if he were touching the past. When it was finished, the objects gleamed. The stones were almost black, and the pottery revealed the simple beauty of the ancients. He took the clean objects back to Ilara. The healer had made a small fire in the center of the corral. The smell of burning sage and cedar was strong, replacing the smell of disinfectant. "They're ready," said Alistair, placing the bucket on the ground. "The venue is almost ready too. Now, Finch, the second step, the sacrifice of pride." She pointed to the pasture, where the cattle moved lethargically. "You go there, alone. You kneel before them and confess your offense. You ask forgiveness from the earth and from them. If you do it from the heart, they will feel it. If you do it as a charade, they will die anyway." Alistair felt a chill in his stomach. Kneel. Beg forgiveness. For his cattle. He was the most respected man in Willow Creek. If one of the ranch hands saw him, the story would spread before dinner. "I can't do this with men watching me." Ilara didn't even look at where the workers were, at a safe distance, pretending to work. They can look. They can laugh. What matters more, the judgment of foolish men or the lives of your flock? Alistair took off his hat. He took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had to do this. He walked slowly toward the pasture. The cattle, which had previously come running at the sound of his voice, were listless. They barely raised their heads as he approached. Alistair stopped beside a Hereford heifer that appeared to be on the verge of death, its gaze vacant. He looked up at the vast Montana sky, then at the dirty earth beneath his boots. He knelt down. The ground was cold and hard, and bending over was difficult for his large, aged body. He didn't care. He began to speak, and his voice was hoarse with emotion. I ask for forgiveness. He looked at the heifer and the other animals that were nearby. I was a fool. I treated this land as if it were only for profit. I thought that money gave me the right to take, to dig, to destroy what was here before me. I did not respect what was sacred. The words came awkwardly at first, but as he spoke, the confession became easier. He poured out his heart about his greed, about how he ignored warnings that the excavations were too deep, about how he threw away sacred relics as if they were trash. I brought the disease to you, not a virus, but the pain of the earth. You are dying because of my pride. I am so sorry. I am truly sorry. Alistair lowered his head, feeling empty. He remained kneeling for a moment, shame and honesty weighing on him. When he raised his head, he saw the heifer closest to him, the one that looked like it was about to fall, twitched its ear. Then it raised its head and looked at Alistair. Its eyes were still sad, but the emptiness seemed to have lessened. It gave a low moo, almost a sigh. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was a sign. The cattle had heard. The land had heard. Alistair stood up, brushing the dirt off his trousers, and returned to the fence where Ilara was waiting for him. The earth has accepted its pain. Now, the final act, the removal of the scar. She pointed to the refrigerated barn, Alistair's pride and joy, which gleamed in the afternoon sun. Destroy it, and leave no stone unturned. Alistair didn't hesitate any longer. He walked over to the farm's phone and called the demolition company he had a contract with. I want the new cold storage barn, the one on the southwest corner, to be torn down. Now. The demolition manager thought Alistair had drunk too much. Mr. Finch, the barn was only opened 3 years ago. It's the most modern in the state. I know what I'm saying. Start mobilizing the excavators. I don't care about the cost. I want it on the ground by the end of the day. If you can't do that, I'll call the competition. In less than 2 hours, Finch Farm was filled with a noise that wasn't the sound of silent death, but the roar of steel and heavy engines. Bulldozers and tractors arrived quickly, and the buzz in the town of Willow Creek reached a frenzy. Farmer Finch was mad. He was destroying his own empire. Alistair ignored the phone calls from neighbors and bankers. He stood beside Ilara, watching the demolition begin. You need to make sure the foundation is completely removed. The concrete you put in is what's suffocating the soil the most, Ilara instructed. Alistair ordered the operators to go deep. The noise was deafening. Metal twisted, cement cracked, and thermal insulation flew through the air like dirty snow. With each blow of the wrecking ball, Alistair felt a tightness in his chest, but also a strange relief. He was paying the price. He was undoing the mistake. As the barn collapsed, Ilara began her work. She retrieved the artifacts Alistair had cleaned, and with Silas's help, began placing them back in the exact spot where they had been found, now that the concrete was being removed. She created a small circle where the pieces of pottery and smooth stones were arranged with reverence. She covered them with a thin layer of clean earth, and then scattered the herbs she had gathered in the forest, sage, mugwort, and a handful of earth from under Bear Waterfall. The circle is closed, Finch. The earth can breathe again. The demolition lasted until sunset. When the last piece of foundation was ripped away, all that remained was a large hole in the ground, with the smell of damp clay rising in the air. Alistair was covered in dust and exhausted. He looked at the spot where his $1 million barn had been and felt a pang of loss, but the feeling that he had done the right thing was stronger. And now, what do we plant here? He asked. Nothing that requires mastery. You're going to plant native grass and wildflowers, and you're going to fence this place off so that no one steps here. It's a memorial. A resting place. Alistair agreed. He looked at the pasture. The cattle were still there, but something had changed. They were no longer huddled together in fear. Some animals were moving, searching for pasture, and the heifer that Alistair had seen dying was standing, chewing slowly. It was a silent miracle. The animals are getting better, whispered Silas, who was standing next to Alistair watching the scene. Balance has been restored for now, Ilara said, picking up her cloth bag and walking stick. For now? Alistair asked. What else do I have to do? The earth is patient, but it has a memory. You paid the price for your mistake, but you haven't changed your life. The plague will not return as long as you honor this place, but your cattle are still weak. I will give you a tea to mix with their water for 3 days. It's to strengthen their blood. And you must do one more thing." Ilara looked at him one last time. "You must stop seeing cattle only as money. You must treat them as creatures of the earth. You must give them what the earth gives, space and peace." She handed Alistair a small packet of dried herbs, tied with string. "Don't look for me anymore, Finch. I did what the land asked of me. Now, the responsibility is yours." And with the same quiet dignity with which she had arrived, Ilara turned and began to walk toward the river and the forest. She didn't ask for a ride, nor did she look back. She disappeared into the darkness that was already falling over Willow Creek. Alistair Finch stood there amidst the ruins of his pride, clutching the bundle of herbs. His reputation was ruined, but his farm was safe. That night, Alistair did not go to his luxurious home. He stayed in the barn, watching the cattle. He mixed herbs into the water and watched the animals drink. The scent of sage hung in the air, and the silence was no longer the silence of death, but the silence of peace. The next day, news of the barn's demolition had reached every corner of Montana. Alistair Finch was the talk of the week, and ridicule was inevitable. But curiously, no one else died on the Finch Ranch. For the first time in a long time, Alistair felt at peace. He had lost his biggest investment, but he had gained something invaluable: the understanding that you can't control everything with money. He spent the following weeks overseeing the cleanup of the site. He hired gardeners to plant native grass and wildflowers on the site of the former sanctuary, and ensured that a simple, low wooden fence was erected to protect the area. He continued to treat the cattle with a respect he had never shown before. He stopped shouting orders and began to listen to Silas. The herd slowly recovered. The apathy disappeared. They grazed vigorously again, and the loud, joyful lowing echoed once more across the fields of Willow Creek. The neighbors, who had previously mocked Alistair, began to notice the change. Finch's cattle not only stopped dying, but seemed healthier than ever. The mystery of the plague had transformed into the mystery of the cure. Alistair Finch, the arrogant tycoon, had been broken and remade by the earth. He had paid the price for his pride. But the story doesn't end simply with the cattle saved and the farmer redeemed, because the land, when it gives, also demands interest. And the peace that Ilara had restored came with a condition. The memory of what had happened there could not be forgotten. Alistair had restored rest to the guardians, and they, in turn, had restored life to their flock. But what would happen if the farmer, over time, reverted to his old habits of ambition and disrespect? Alistair Finch was about to discover that the nature of the curse wasn't merely to kill the cattle, but to keep watch over the man who dared to desecrate the sacred. Ilara was gone, but the crows hadn't gone anywhere. They continued to watch, perched on the fences of the Finch farm, like silent judges, waiting to see if the wealthy farmer had truly learned his lesson. And the land, now at rest, waited patiently. Alistair Finch's true test was only beginning. He had made the sacrifice, but the penance was for life. He had to prove day after day that the price he paid was worth it. He had to live with the humiliation and the newfound respect for the unseen force that governs the Great Plains of Montana. Alistair Finch stood amidst the ruins of his pride, clutching the bundle of herbs. His reputation was ruined, but his farm was safe. That night, Alistair did not go to his luxurious home. He stayed in the barn, watching the cattle. He mixed herbs into the water and watched the animals drink. The scent of sage hung in the air, and the silence was no longer the silence of death, but the silence of peace. The next day, news of the barn's demolition had reached every corner of Montana. Alistair Finch was the talk of the week, and ridicule was inevitable. But, curiously, no one else died on the Finch Ranch. For the first time in a long time, Alistair felt at peace. He had lost his biggest investment, but he had gained something invaluable: the understanding that you can't control everything with money. He spent the following weeks overseeing the cleanup of the site. He hired gardeners to plant native grass and wildflowers on the site of the former sanctuary, and ensured that a simple, low wooden fence was erected to protect the area. He continued to treat the cattle with a respect he had never shown before. He stopped shouting orders and began to listen to Silas. The herd slowly recovered. The apathy disappeared. They grazed vigorously again, and the loud, joyful lowing echoed once more across the fields of Willow Creek. The neighbors, who had previously mocked Alistair, began to notice the change. Finch's cattle not only stopped dying, but seemed healthier than ever. The mystery of the plague had transformed into the mystery of the cure. Alistair Finch, the arrogant tycoon, had been broken and remade by the earth. He had paid the price for his pride. But, my friends, the price of pride is not just a one-time payment. It is a debt that is paid every day. And the earth, when it grants peace, demands constant vigilance. The first major test came from the most logical and cruel place: the bank. 3 days after the demolition, a sleek black luxury car drove up the dirt road to the Finch farm. Out stepped Mr. Thompson, the vice president of rural loans at the Missoula Bank, a man Alistair considered a friend, but who was, in reality, a servant of profit. Thompson was thin, wore an impeccable suit, and sported thin-rimmed glasses. He stared at the open hole where the $1 million barn should have been, and his face went white. "Alistair, what for God's sake happened here?" Thompson shouted, pointing to the rubble. "Is this vandalism, a construction accident?" Alistair, who had been supervising Ben and Jerry planting native seeds at the sacred site, came up to the fence. He was wearing old work clothes, and there was dirt under his fingernails. "No, Thompson, it was a demolition. I ordered the barn to be torn down." Thompson took off his glasses and rubbed his forehead. "Are you serious? That barn was the main asset securing your modernization loan, Alistair. Do you have any idea what that means for your balance sheet?" "That means my cattle are no longer dying," Alistair replied, his voice calm, lacking his usual arrogance. Thompson laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "Are you telling me that your $7 million investment was demolished because it was making your cattle sick? Alistair, we need to have a serious conversation about your mental health." They went to the office. Thompson spread mortgage papers out on the oak desk. "Finch Farm is in danger. The bank can't accept you destroying the collateral. The rumors in Willow Creek are terrible. They say you're being advised by a crazy faith healer." Alistair took a deep breath. This was the moment to choose between his old self, the man who would lie and manipulate to maintain appearances, and his new self, the man who had accepted the truth of the earth. "The rumors are true, Thompson. I called Ilara, and what she told me was the truth. The problem here wasn't scientific, it was spiritual. I offended the earth, and it was defending itself, killing my cattle. That barn was built on sacred ground. I had to remove it." Thompson slammed the folder shut with a loud snap. "Alistair, you're talking in terms of curses and rituals. I'm talking in terms of contract clauses. The bank demands that you reinstate the collateral or pay the balance. Otherwise, we will be forced to foreclose on the farm." Alistair's blood ran cold. It was the final threat, losing the farm for which he had sacrificed his pride. And what would the bank accept as new collateral? "You have a lot of pasture on the western border, near the Willow River. It's a less productive area, but it's worth a lot. You can sell that portion of land immediately, cover the loss on the barn, and renegotiate the rest." Thompson was offering Alistair a logical and quick way out. Sell a piece of land he barely used, calm the bank, and continue with the rest of his empire. But Alistair remembered Ilara's words. "You treated this land as if it were only for profit. Selling a piece of the Finch farm to cover up a mistake born of arrogance would only repeat the cycle of disrespect." He looked at Thompson with a firmness that surprised the banker. "I'm not going to sell an inch of my land, Thompson. I paid the price to restore the balance. Selling the land now would be admitting that money is still more important than the life it sustains." "You're committing financial suicide, Alistair." "Perhaps, but my cattle are alive." Thompson was furious. He threatened lawyers, public ruin, bankruptcy. Alistair heard everything but remained unmoved. "Tell your counsel that I will repay the loan, but I will not sell the land. I will rebuild my herd, and I will pay with the profits from my production. It will take longer, but it will be done honorably." Thompson stormed out of the farm, promising a bloody legal battle. But Alistair knew he had passed the first test. He had chosen the land over immediate profit and financial reputation. Over time, life at Finch Farm settled into a new rhythm. Silas, who had previously been just the foreman, became Alistair's silent advisor. He was the link between the farmer and the wisdom of the land. Alistair radically changed his practices. He stopped using the heavy chemical fertilizers that promised rapid growth but, according to Silas, tired the soil. He returned to older pasture rotation techniques, allowing the land to rest. The site of the old barn had become a small green sanctuary, surrounded by the simple wooden fence that Alistair had built with his own hands. He visited the place every day, not to pray, but to remember the price of his arrogance. And the crows? Ah, the crows. They never left. They followed Alistair. Not aggressively, but vigilantly. If Alistair was in the pasture, there were ravens on the fences. If he was inspecting the river, they were in the nearby trees. They were the eyes of Ilara, the guardians of the land's memory. Alistair had even grown accustomed to their presence. They were a constant reminder that he couldn't relax. The herd's recovery was slow but steady. The cattle were no longer dying, but there was still a residual weakness, a vulnerability that worried him. The second major test came at the end of summer, when the Montana heat became oppressive. Finch Farm relied on a modern irrigation system that Alistair had installed years before, drawing water from the Willow River through powerful pumps to keep the pasture green, even during droughts. One morning, Silas came to Alistair's office looking worried. "Mr. Finch, take a look at the north pasture. The heifers are lethargic again. They're not dying, but they have the same tired look." Alistair ran to the pasture. It was the same lethargy, the same sign that life was dwindling. The panic of weeks ago threatened to return. He examined the soil. It was green thanks to constant irrigation, but it seemed artificially damp. He smelled the grass. It didn't have the strong, rich scent of a healthy pasture. "What's wrong, Silas? The sacred site is intact. I didn't use any chemicals." Silas pointed to the irrigation system, metal pipes that pumped water under high pressure. "Do you remember what Ilara said? That the land rejects what is imposed. When you installed those pumps, the natural flow of the river changed. The water comes too fast, too cold, and doesn't have the same rhythm that the land needs. The land is working too hard to absorb this forced water." Alistair considered the idea. The irrigation system was an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, designed to maximize productivity. Turning it off would mean that in 2 weeks, the pasture would be dry under the summer sun. It would be a disaster for the herd. "But if I turn it off, the pasture will dry up. The cattle will go hungry." "They will go hungry for a while, sir, but if the earth cannot breathe, they will die of sadness again. The water has to flow naturally." Alistair walked to the spot. He remembered how the river used to meander there before he had channeled part of it for irrigation. He had altered nature to serve his profit. He looked at the listless heifers and the crows perched on the fence, watching him. They were waiting. This was the test. He would choose efficiency and profit or peace and respect. He picked up the phone and called the maintenance foreman. "I want the irrigation system for the northern pasture completely dismantled. Pull out the pipes, remove the pumps. I want the river back to its natural flow, and I want the work to begin now." The foreman protested, citing the cost and folly of wasting such a new system. Alistair merely repeated the order, his voice firm. He was willing to face drought and temporary famine to honor his promise to the land. Removing the irrigation system was a dirty and expensive job. When the last pipe was pulled out and the flow of the River Willow was restored to its slower, more natural course, Alistair felt the tension leave his shoulders. The pasture had dried up, yes, but he moved the cattle to the less used area near the forest. And he noticed something remarkable. The cattle, although eating thinner grass, seemed calmer. The lethargy had disappeared. They were drinking the water from the naturally flowing river and seemed to accept the condition of the land. Alistair Finch had become a different kind of farmer. He was still wealthy, but his focus had shifted from accumulating wealth to sustaining it. He invested in organic techniques, accepting lower productivity in exchange for the health and peace of his herd and his land. The Missoula Bank tried to sue him for breach of contract, but Alistair's story, the demolition of the barn and the abandonment of modern irrigation, was so bizarre that the local media turned it into a legend. He became Farmer Finch the eccentric, who preferred talking to the herbs to listening to the bankers. Alistair lost his reputation as an infallible businessman, but gained something deeper: the tacit respect of his team and the tranquility of his homeland. Silas, now more of a partner than an employee, was one day with Alistair inspecting the barn memorial, which was flourishing with native sage and clover. "You did well, Finch," said Silas, looking at the spot. "The land is happy." "I only did what was necessary, Silas. I paid the price." Silas looked at the crows perched on the fence. "The price has been paid, but the work is not finished. Ilara said the curse wasn't about killing the cattle, but about keeping watch over man. And they are keeping watch." Alistair nodded. He knew the danger no longer came from a virus or a mysterious disease. The danger came from within himself, from the temptation to revert to being the Alistair Finch who measured success only in monetary terms. He had peace, but it was a fragile peace, sustained by his daily humility. What if he failed? What if he reverted to his arrogance? The cattle were safe, but Finch Farm was under oath. The land had taught Alistair that the sacred cannot be bought, and the lesson could not be forgotten. Time passed, and Finch Farm became a model of sustainable, albeit less profitable, agriculture. Alistair was content with having enough and seeing his animals thrive. He had accepted his new identity as the eccentric farmer of Willow Creek. But the story still had one last knot to untie. The earth had given life back, but Ilara had spoken of interest. What would the earth demand now that Alistair had redeemed himself? Peace was a gift, but the vigilance of the ravens was the guarantee. Alistair Finch knew that to complete his penance, he needed to ensure that the lesson he had learned did not die with him. He needed to do something that went beyond financial sacrifice. He needed to make a sacrifice that honored Ilara herself and the wisdom she represented, ensuring that no one in Willow Creek would ever again ignore the whispers of the earth. He thought about his future, about the lack of heirs to run the farm. He needed to make a final decision about the fate of Finch Farm, a decision that would permanently seal his commitment to the land and to the price he had paid for his pride. And that decision, he knew, would be the hardest thing he had ever done in his business life, surpassing even the demolition of his barn. He had to ensure that the legacy of humility, not profit, was what remained at Willow Creek. He had to plan his final act of redemption. Alistair Finch knew that to complete his penance, he needed to ensure that the lesson he had learned did not die with him. He needed to do something that went beyond financial sacrifice. He needed to make a sacrifice that honored Ilara herself and the wisdom she represented, ensuring that no one in Willow Creek would ever again ignore the whispers of the earth. He thought about his future, about the lack of heirs to run the farm. He needed to make a final decision about the fate of Finch Farm, a decision that would permanently seal his commitment to the land and to the price he had paid for his pride. And that decision, he knew, would be the hardest thing he had ever done in his business life, surpassing even the demolition of his barn. He had to ensure that the legacy of humility, not profit, was what remained at Willow Creek. He had to plan his final act of redemption. Alistair spent a week thinking. The bank, led by Mr. Thompson, continued to pressure him, threatening foreclosure, but Alistair paid the bare minimum, stretching out the deadline while his cattle regained weight. He was playing a game of patience he never knew he possessed. He called his longtime lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man who understood great fortunes but nothing of crows or witch doctors. Mr. Davies arrived at the farm, and the first thing he did was look at the empty hole in the barn. He didn't comment, but the tremor in his hand as he held the briefcase said it all. In the office, Alistair got straight to the point. "Davies, I want to create a foundation for preserving the land." Davies frowned, adjusting his glasses. "A charitable foundation, Alistair? Excellent for tax purposes. What cause does it support?" "For this land, for Finch Farm. I want the land where the barn stood, and the entire surrounding area, including access to Bear Falls, to be permanently protected. There can be no construction there ever again, and this area cannot be used for profit." Davies dropped his pen. "Alistair, you're talking about hundreds of acres of valuable pasture, and you want to take that off the farm's inventory? That will devastate the market value, and the bank will crush us." "Let them crush it," Alistair said with a dry smile. I no longer care about market value. I care about real value. I want this land returned to its natural state. And the foundation should be managed by a board that includes people who understand ancestral agricultural practices, not just balance sheets. Are you suggesting that your foreman Silas should be part of the board of directors? I'm demanding it. Silas understands this land better than any doctor I've ever paid. Davies tried to argue, citing heritage, the future, common sense. Alistair was inflexible. I have no heirs, Davies, and my legacy will not be the size of my bank account. It will be the peace of this land. Alistair spent the following months working with Davies to draft the most complicated legal documents the lawyer had ever seen. The goal was simple: to shield Finch Farm from future greed. The sanctuary grounds, including the memorial of native flowers and grass, were legally separated, rendered untouchable. With his final act of business, Alistair Finch was ensuring that the debt to the land would be paid not only by him, but by anyone who came after him. He was sacrificing complete control of his property to secure his soul. When the documents were finally signed and registered, Alistair felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had returned the resting place to its former guardians, and now he was ensuring that the resting place remained peaceful. Time continued its flow. Alistair grew old on the Finch farm, transformed from an arrogant tycoon into a wise and humble farmer. He and Silas worked side by side. The cattle, healthy and strong, were living proof of the healing. Finch Farm never again had an unexplained health problem. The land was at peace, and that peace was reflected in the vitality of the herd. Mr. Thompson from the bank eventually gave up the fight. Alistair's story was so public and strange that the bank feared bad publicity. They accepted the new reality of a farmer who valued wildflowers more than profit. Alistair Finch lived to a ripe old age, dying peacefully in his home, surrounded by the quiet of the farm he had come to love. After his death, the foundation he created came into effect. Finch Farm continued to operate under the new management, following the principles of sustainability and respect for the land that Alistair had learned so painfully. The site of the old barn remained as a small field of flowers, a silent memorial. And what happened to Ilara, the healer? No one in Willow Creek ever saw her again. She never set foot on the Finch farm again after that day of demolition. She had fulfilled her mission of restoring balance and teaching the farmer. But his presence, his vigilance remained. Silas, who became the foundation's first administrator, continued to care for the farm. He was the guardian of wisdom, and he noticed that even years after Alistair's death, the crows never left Finch Farm. They were no longer a sign of threat, but of memory. They perched on the low fence that protected the flower sanctuary, watching the cattle grazing peacefully. They watched the young ranchers, who now touched the land with respect, and they watched the Montana sky. The plague, my friends, was not a curse to kill the cattle. It was a lesson, brutal and costly, to save a man's soul and ensure that the land, the true treasure, would be respected forever. And so Finch Farm, which had been nearly destroyed by its owner's arrogance, became a haven of peace, where the whisper of the earth was heard above the noise of money, and where the story of the old healer and the crows was told to each new generation, so that Alistair Finch's lesson would never be forgotten. The land had exacted its price, and peace had finally come to stay,